Okay, so let's talk about camera angle and camera placement. So where you put the camera can say a lot about what you're trying to convey with your scene. So if you have a camera really far away or a camera really close, it can say two very different things. So for instance, the camera right now is really quite far away. So where we have a scene where I'm playing the piano, then it can look something like, with the camera far away, it can make me look a little bit more lonely. It can make me look a little bit more like I am separated from anyone around me. It can just imply a lot of things subliminally, more so than a close-up would. So here we are in a close-up, right? So this is a pretty normal close-up. You can be even closer if you want to. You can do extreme close-ups. That says something different as well if you really want to bring people's attention to things. But what this can convey is just more of an intimacy or more of a closeness that you miss with the wide shot. So if you want a scene that's happening with some really intense emotions or something that you really want to get across in someone's face, then going into a close-up can easier convey those, but it also just gives across that sense of intimacy that you don't get when the camera is farther away. But it doesn't necessarily need to be a close-up of a face. It can be a close-up of my fingers as I'm playing this piano, or it can be a close-up of someone picking something up. Anything that you want to draw attention to, that you want your audience to pay attention to, is things that you can kind of bring into a close-up. Okay, so let's talk about camera height. So right now the camera is very low, and I'm almost basically standing on top of it. So what does that say creatively, and what does that say narratively? Well, visually, it makes me look very tall. It makes me look like I am a very physically large person. It also could say emotionally that maybe I am in control of the situation, or I am a dominating personality over whoever is on the other end of this shot, right? So by implying simply a lower camera angle, we can say a whole bunch, especially when you contrast it with a high angle. So this says something drastically different than what we just looked at. And especially when put next to each other, it can make me feel extremely small while the other person feels extremely large. It can also imply power dynamic emotionally, or who has control of a scene. And it doesn't need to be this dramatic either. This is really dramatic to display a point, but even just raising an angle a foot or so versus another one can imply a lot about what you're trying to say between two characters. Okay, so now that we've talked about what camera angles and camera heights mean creatively, let's talk about just some basic things that you want to consider when you're setting up your frame, when you're setting up your shot. So a couple things. We want to make sure that you are not situated awkwardly within the frame. What do I mean by that? I mean this. This would be considered awkwardly in the frame, right? Why am I down here? We have way too much headroom up here. We definitely want this to be lower because I am the center of the attention here, and this is pretty strange framing, right? So we don't want this much headroom above. We also don't want this, right? We don't want me to be kind of out of the frame, right? Now I have no headspace at all. My hair is being cut off. This feels very uncomfortable. We definitely don't want this. We also don't want this. I'm awkwardly off to the side, right? I'm almost very much to the edge. I have no space between me and the edge of the frame. It feels very awkward, it feels very uncomfortable, and it's just not really good framing. So you want to make sure that you're comfortably placed within the frame. You want to make sure you have enough headroom. You want to make sure you don't have too much headroom. You want to make sure you're not awkwardly too close to the edges of the frame, but you don't necessarily need to be in the center of the frame. You could be here, right? You could be a little bit off to the side. We don't need to center ourselves. We can work on a third, on this third. We can be in the center. We just want to make sure we're not awkwardly too close to the edges of the frame. Another thing we want to consider is we want to make sure that on a normal shot, we want to make sure that the angle is approximately eye level, right? So the camera lens is pretty much right at my eye level. We had talked about having a camera high and a camera low and what that means, but unless you're trying to say something specific like that, you usually want to sit at eye level. It's just the most flattering in terms of not seeing and looking up underneath our chins or seeing too up and looking down. It just feels the most natural. So on normal shots where you're not purposely having the camera raised or lowered, you want to be right around eye level.